My name is Delaney Smith. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a full-time housewife. I've been married for 3 years, but we don't have a child yet. My husband, Colton, is 28 and works in an office. We met when I was working as a receptionist, and he was one of our clients. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Before we got married, there was no talk about living with his parents. But once the wedding was planned, Colton's mom insisted we live with them. I told Colton I didn't want to live with his parents as newlyweds, but he said, "You'll be staying home, and I'll be at work, so it's fair." Then, he held up his hand and made a stop gesture. I felt I had no choice but to agree. I thought maybe it was expected since he was the oldest son. When we were making wedding plans, Colton's mom kept coming with us. She gave her opinions about everything, even Colton's clothes. It felt like she was running the show. I couldn't help but think, is he marrying me or his mom? One day, I asked Colton, "Are you a mama's boy?" He looked confused and asked, "Why do you think that?" I said, "Most couples plan weddings together, not with their moms." Colton replied, "She just wanted to help. It's not a big deal." Then he laughed and said, "I'm not a mama's boy. If I were, what would you do?" I told him, "If you were, I wouldn't marry you." Colton promised, "Don't worry. I'll protect you if my mom ever bothers you." After that, his mom stopped coming to the wedding plans. We got married, moved into his parents' house, and left for our honeymoon. When we came back, I was shocked. Our room was already set up with furniture I didn't choose. I couldn't find my things anywhere. Asked Colton, and he told me to ask his mom. When I asked her, she said, "I threw away what I thought you didn't need." I said, "But my bank book and other important things were in there." She smiled and said, "Don't worry. I kept the important stuff safe." I told her, "Those are my personal things. Please give them back." She made a sour face and said, "How dare you talk to me like that?" But she stomped off and brought back my bank book. When I opened it, I saw $20,000 was missing. "Did you take $20,000 from my account?" I asked. She calmly said, "Yes, I bought your furniture." I felt so angry. I went back to our room and told Colton. He just said, "Oh, so she bought the furniture? Nice." I lost my temper. Using my savings without asking is wrong. And this furniture is so ugly. Colton shrugged and said, "I'll talk to her." He came back and said, "She's angry and won't talk about it." I sat on the bed, feeling sad. The pink curtains with big roses and the cheap furniture made me feel even worse. I wondered if I had made a big mistake marrying him. Colton told me that his mom said she didn't deserve any complaints because she did everything out of kindness. I stared at him in disbelief. "Don't you feel sad looking at this furniture, these curtains, and the bed cover?" I asked. Colton looked around the room, his face turning pale. "Let's try to change it a little without her noticing," he said, trying to calm me down. "And what about the money? Will I get it back?" I asked. I didn't work hard and save all that money just to waste it on things like this. Colton apologized for what his mom had done and promised to repay me little by little with his salary and bonus. I also told Colton I was sorry for starting a fight with his mom on our first day living together. Even though I didn't want to, I told him I'd apologize to his mom too. When I said to her, "Mother-in-law, I'm sorry for what I said earlier," she replied, "So, you're the kind of person who complains about everything, huh? Just know if you ever go against me again, there will be consequences." Although she forgave me, I knew she was still upset. The following day, my mother-in-law woke me up at 4 a.m. "Go buy bread from the bakery in the next town. It opens at 5 a.m., she said. I didn't want to argue after what happened the day before, so I just said, "Okay." I decided to take my bike, but I couldn't find the key. Thinking it might still be on the bike, I went outside, but the bike was gone. It had probably been thrown away. With no other choice, I changed into my sneakers, put on my favorite music, and ran all the way to the bakery. Running through the quiet streets early in the morning felt nice. When I got back home with the bread, I was ready to take a shower. But my mother-in-law stopped me. "You're not working, so you don't need a shower. Just use a towel to wipe off your sweat," she said, tossing a towel at me. I knew she was still mad, so I gave up on the idea of showering. I started preparing breakfast for my husband and in-laws. Even though there weren't many ingredients in the fridge, I enjoy cooking and managed to make a nice meal. Once everything was ready, I woke up Colton and let everyone know breakfast was served. When we sat at the table, I was about to join them when my mother-in-law said, "You're the daughter-in-law. You can't eat with us. You eat after we finish and clean everything." I glanced at Colton, hoping he'd say something, but he just looked away, pretending not to notice. I muttered under my breath, "Are these rules from the 1955s? But I knew arguing wouldn't help, so I quietly obeyed. When Colton left for work, he mouthed sorry to me and gave me a little bow. I couldn't help but laugh a bit. He might not be very thoughtful, I thought, but I want to make this house a place he wants to come back to. After breakfast, I told my mother-in-law, "I'll start cleaning now," and began tidying the house. She sat on the couch, glancing at me now and then, but not saying anything. Since she was in the living room, I decided to clean that area last. I kept myself busy with laundry and cleaning the other rooms first. When I finally got to the living room, I noticed that my mother-in-law had left. Once the cleaning was done, I made some tea. That's when I noticed a small window near the fridge was open. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice. She was outside talking to a neighbor, and she was telling lies about me. I overheard her say, "She took my bank book, and now I have no money to spend freely." I couldn't stay quiet. When she came back inside, I confronted her. "Please don't lie to the neighbors. When did I ever take your bank books?" Looking startled, she quickly shut the window and yelled, "Do whatever you want." Then she stormed off to her bedroom. I knew that if this went on, it would only make things harder for Colton, being stuck between me and his mom. So I decided to try and be more patient with her. But no matter how hard I tried, she acted like I didn't exist. She ignored me every time I tried to talk to her, treating me like I wasn't even there. Colton's father didn't say much either. He was a quiet man who ran a veterinary clinic. He seemed too scared of his wife to stand up to her. One Wednesday, when his clinic was closed, we had a chance to talk. "You know," he said quietly, "she told me she's okay with you two getting a divorce. But it hasn't happened yet, so I guess things are still working out. She can't be serious. Maybe she's just testing how much you care about your husband," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You must be really loved, huh?" We laughed together, sharing our frustrations about life behind the scenes. In that moment, I felt like I had an ally. My father-in-law was my only comfort. Thanks to him, I never shared my complaints or frustrations about my mother-in-law with Colton. But it seemed that my mother-in-law was telling Colton all sorts of bad things about me. Whenever Colton mentioned her complaints, I would calmly say, "I'm sorry, I'll be more careful," just to make him feel better. No matter how much my mother-in-law ignored me, I kept working hard and didn't slack off on housework. Even though I did my best, she still treated me like I wasn't even there. Luckily, I had a good relationship with the neighbors, which gave me some peace. Colton's job became busier, and he had to go on more business trips. Whenever he was away, I felt anxious about spending more time alone with my mother-in-law. When Colton called me, though he didn't call often, I would always tell him things were fine, hoping that one day I could truly get along with his mom. Even though she treated me like I was invisible, I never gave up trying to talk to her. I believed that the only way to improve our relationship was to keep showing her my kindness and hard work. I stuck to my routine of waking up early and running to the bakery every morning. Before I knew it, 3 years had passed since we got married. My mother-in-law continued to treat both me and my father-in-law like we didn't exist, but I kept looking for moments to chat with my father-in-law whenever she wasn't around. One day, my father-in-law looked unusually serious. "Your mother-in-law is going on a trip soon," he said. "Depending on how that goes, I might leave this house." I was shocked and asked, "What do you mean?" He shook his head and replied, "I can't tell you right now." Hearing this made me really sad. He was the only person who gave me comfort in this house, the only one who listened to me. The idea of him leaving was hard to accept, and I couldn't hold back my tears. Looking into my eyes, he gently said, "Maybe you should think about leaving this house too, Delaney." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I can't explain yet," he replied. but I'll tell you when the time is right. Please wait a little longer. Even though I was anxious, I decided to trust him and wait for the right time. Finally, after 2 long months, Colton was coming home from his business trip. I was excited, thinking we'd be able to live together again. But the night before he was due to return, I got a phone call on WhatsApp. I quickly answered, expecting to hear Colton's voice. But instead, a woman with a sweet tone said, "Hello, are you Colton's wife?" "Yes, I am," I replied, confused. "And who are you?" "My name is Brielle Adams. I'm Colton's girlfriend," she said with a giggle. "I'll give him back to you tomorrow." I was stunned. What was this woman talking about? "What do you mean, you're his girlfriend?" I asked. "I told you," she repeated. "I'm his girlfriend. We're planning to get married." I felt my heart drop. "So, you're not his mistress?" "Nope," she answered with a laugh. "I'm his girlfriend." Her giggles made her sound immature, or maybe drunk. "How did you meet him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a temp worker at Colton's company," she said, still giggling. Something told me she might spill more if I kept pushing her. So I decided to test her a little. "Oh, Colton has been so good to me," I said with a laugh. "He told me he won't need to go on any more business trips. I'm really excited about us starting a family soon. No more business trips?" Brielle said, sounding surprised. "Did he really tell you that?" "Yes, we've been planning it for a while. We're going to try for a baby soon," I added, pretending to be cheerful. Brielle's tone suddenly changed. "That's impossible," she said coldly. "I'm already pregnant with his child." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She just told me she was carrying my husband's baby. Then, as if it was no big deal, Brielle added, "You know, your mother-in-law doesn't even think of you as her daughter-in-law. Why don't you just get a divorce?" Hearing her mention my mother-in-law threw me off. How did she know about my relationship with Colton's mom? "Did my mother-in-law tell you that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Well, Brielle laughed, enjoying the moment. I didn't know how else to respond. I let out a nervous laugh, not knowing what to say next. Brielle, now sounding a bit annoyed, asked, "Have you ever gone on a trip with your mother-in-law?" She can't be serious. Maybe she's just testing how much you care about Colton, I thought to myself. Brielle giggled and said, "You must be jealous that I'm close with Colton and your mother-in-law." I felt disgusted. "Did you just run into them by chance on a trip?" "I'm not jealous at all. After all, we're married," I replied. Without saying anything else, Brielle started sending me dozens of photos of her with my husband. I quickly saved every single one. Among them, I found several pictures of my mother-in-law looking cozy with another man. Even with all these pictures, I still told myself, this doesn't really prove anything. Colton wouldn't betray me. "Thanks for your time," I said, pretending to hang up. Wait. I have proof." "Just wait," Brielle said quickly. I stayed silent. A moment later, she sent screenshots of her WhatsApp conversations with Colton. There were many of them, and I saved every single one. After that, I calmly said, "Thank you," and ended the call. As soon as I hung up, I burst into tears. I had trusted him. I thought he loved me. I thought he was on my side. My emotions were a mess. The confident version of me that had talked back to Brielle earlier was gone. I stormed out of the house and went straight to my dad's office. I flung the door open, crying, and asked, "Where's Dad?" My dad was busy, so I waited alone in the waiting room, tears streaming down my face. After a while, he took a break and came to see me. I apologized for coming without warning and told him everything. Dad listened quietly as I showed him the photos and the WhatsApp conversations between Colton and Brielle. When he saw the pictures, he exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" One photo showed my mother-in-law with a man standing beside her. My dad's expression turned serious. "I need to talk to your father-in-law," Dad said firmly. It turns out my dad is a lawyer, and I could tell he was quietly furious. When I got back home, I told my father-in-law that my dad wanted to speak with him. He immediately went into the bedroom and made a phone call. After the call, he came back and said, "I'll meet your dad, Delaney." The next day, Colton came back from his business trip. I greeted him with a blank expression. He acted like nothing had happened, probably unaware of what Brielle had told me. Not long after, my mother-in-law returned from her trip. "I'm exhausted, but it was fun," she said cheerfully and handed me a souvenir from the same region where Colton had been. As usual, the three of them, Colton, my mother-in-law, and father-in-law, sat down to eat the meal I had prepared, while I sat quietly, watching. Colton looked at me and said, "Delaney, you seem different since I've been away, kind of colder." Before I could respond, my mother-in-law chimed in. "Maybe she's sulking because you were away on a business trip and she wanted attention," she said with a dismissive laugh, not even glancing my way. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm, but anger boiled inside me. My father-in-law gave me a quick look, silently telling me to stay composed. I nodded and took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. Just then, my mother-in-law said something that shattered my calm. "You and my husband have been spending a lot of time alone together, haven't you?" she asked with a sly grin. "Did something happen between the two of you? Come on, don't hide it, just tell me." Her words felt like a slap in the face. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to hold back my anger. She smirked. "Right? You had a relationship with him, didn't you?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I can't believe you'd say that." My usually quiet father-in-law glared at her and said firmly, "Did you go on this trip hoping something romantic would happen between me and Delaney?" She sneered. "If nothing happened, why are you getting so angry?" With a cold stare, my father-in-law replied, "I despise you. I can't forgive you as a person." Then, without another word, he left the room, saying, "I'll be at the hospital for a while. Don't contact me." After he left, my mother-in-law turned to me and said, "You can leave too, Delaney." I looked at Colton, hoping he'd say something, anything, to defend me. He glanced back at me with a startled expression, but before he could speak, his mother snapped, "What's the matter? Got an issue with Colton? Acting all high and mighty as usual? This is why I don't want to talk to you. Go to your father's clinic if you want." Colton sat there silently, doing nothing to stop her. I turned to him, my voice shaking with frustration. "Colton, don't you have anything to say? This is exactly what I warned you about before we got married. What happened to 'I'll protect you if my mom does anything to you'?" Colton's face went pale. He looked shocked by my outburst, as if he didn't know how to respond. Seeing his reaction, my mother-in-law smirked and said, "Then why don't you just leave? Get out." I asked Colton, "Is this okay with you?" But Colton didn't answer. He just held his head in his hands. That's his way of saying, "Get out." He's just too kind to say it directly. I kept looking at him and asked again, "So, it's okay?" No answer came, and I whispered to myself, "No answer means that's my answer, right?" Colton finally said, "I need to think. Please wait a little." Then, he went to the bathroom. I didn't wash the dishes or take a bath. I just went straight to bed in our room. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I didn't prepare breakfast. Instead, I packed a few things and headed to my parents' house. When I got there, I used my spare key to enter. I took a shower, letting the water wash away all my thoughts. The noise woke my mom, and she looked surprised to see me. Soon after, my dad woke up too. He simply said, "Good morning," and went into his study. When my dad came out, he handed me an envelope. I looked inside while telling my parents about my mother-in-law telling me to leave and how Colton still hadn't given me a clear answer. After I finished looking through the papers, I told my parents, "I can't live with Colton anymore. Can I come back home?" Both of them smiled and said, "Of course. This is your home." I bowed my head in gratitude. When I looked up, my dad said, "Calm down. You look like you've seen a ghost." Reading the documents in the envelope filled me with anger. Colton's betrayal and my mother-in-law's endless harassment swirled in my mind. I took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. As strange as it sounds, I started feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. This was going to be the perfect revenge. In the afternoon, my dad and I went to my father-in-law's veterinary clinic, which was closed that day. When we arrived, my father-in-law greeted me warmly. "Delaney, are you okay?" he asked, looking worried. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a small smile. He seemed relieved, but my father-in-law, and I sat down to talk. We agreed to take action the next day. The next day, I called Colton during his lunch break and asked him to meet me at a diner after work. When he arrived, he was out of breath and full of questions. "Why didn't you answer my calls? Where have you been? What happened?" he asked frantically. I took a deep breath, just as my dad had advised me. "I'm sorry for leaving without a word," I said calmly. "I was just wandering around the city. But you know what happened, don't you?" I smiled, pretending to be brave, even though my eyes were teary. I had to play the part of a strong woman. When Colton tried to hold my hand, I brushed it away and said, "Brielle's carrying your child, isn't she?" Colton's face went pale. "There's nothing between us. I only love you, Delaney. If you're upset about me meeting her, I won't do it again. Please forgive me," he begged, full of excuses. I dabbed my eyes with a handkerchief and, with a fake cry, said softly, "Don't let the child suffer. That's my last request." Colton looked even more guilty. "I only love you, Delaney, and that will never change," he said, repeating the same empty words. Feeling overwhelmed by guilt, he promised to give me all his savings and an extra $20,000 as compensation. He wanted to make sure I wouldn't struggle, even if we got divorced. I called my dad to meet us at the diner. He brought the divorce papers, stamped and ready. Colton signed them, along with a pledge we had written. Colton apologized to my dad, but my dad just said, "Thanks for the time you spent with my daughter," and we left the diner together. Afterward, I went to my in-laws' house to pack my belongings. Most of my things were already gone, leaving me with just one large bag. As I was getting ready to leave, my mother-in-law walked in with a smirk. "So, you're moving out?" she asked mockingly. I gave her a polite smile. "Yes, I'm leaving now. Thank you for everything." With a spring in my step, I headed back to my parents' house. Finally free. When I got home, I unpacked my things and began tidying up, feeling a sense of relief. This was the fresh start I needed. I got another WhatsApp call on my phone, and I just knew it was Brielle calling to gloat. Sure enough, it was her. "How does it feel to be a loser ex-wife? I'm on top of the world. There's no man I can't have," she said, bragging as usual. I stayed calm and replied, "Good for you. Be happy." Then, with a slight smile, I added, "By the way, I think a letter will arrive for you soon. Please take care of it." Without waiting for her response, I hung up. I couldn't help but feel excited, knowing what was coming next. I couldn't wait to see the final part of the plan my father had thought up. A few days later, I received alimony from my ex-husband and Brielle. Normally, that would have been the end of it, but for me, the story wasn't over yet. Months passed, and finally, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. One day, I got a frantic call from my mother-in-law. "This is all your fault. The house is a mess. Come back and fix this," she yelled. "And what's with this certified letter you sent me?" Pretending I didn't know anything, I calmly asked, "What's going on? Can you explain?" It took a while for her to calm down enough to talk. "I can't discuss this with you. I'll hang up now. I'm just an outsider," I said, adding a little fuel to her frustration. Wait, she begged, desperate for help. Slowly, she began to explain everything. First, she told me that my ex-husband had married Brielle last month. But Brielle had 4 children from her previous relationships, and she brought them along when she moved into my ex-husband's parents' house. The kids were unruly, and Brielle didn't bother to help with chores or childcare, causing chaos in the house. "My son is in a panic. He keeps saying I didn't know about Brielle's 4 kids, she cried. Then she revealed something else. The alimony they had sent me was paid by her, not by Colton. Brielle convinced her to pay by saying she was going to give birth to her grandchild soon. After that, she brought up the certified letter I had sent her. It was about the $20,000 she had taken from my savings without permission. I had asked my dad if we could sue her, since she technically was still part of the family at that time. My dad had smirked and said, "Suing is always an option." Terrified by the letter, my mother-in-law begged me over the phone, "Please don't sue me. I promised to pay back the money." I agreed, telling her, "As long as you return the money, I won't sue." Then she told me more about Brielle's situation. Apparently, Colton told Brielle I shouldn't have cheated and said he wanted to get back together with me. This caused Brielle to become hysterical. Meanwhile, Colton was crying out my name, their house was in chaos, and the kids were running wild. "My head is going to explode," my mother-in-law cried. Then, to top it all off, she told me my father-in-law had served her divorce papers. He was also suing her for compensation because of her affair. My dad, who happened to be my father-in-law's lawyer, had asked me to try to stop the divorce. Hearing all of this, I realized that everything had played out just as my father had planned. We had already known about Brielle's 4 kids from the private investigator's report. What my ex-husband didn't know was that there was a chance Brielle's unborn baby wasn't even his. She had been dating one of his coworkers around the same time. When Brielle's parents found out about her affair, they told her to take the kids with her and disowned her. She had nowhere else to go, so she clung to my ex-husband's family. I knew it was finally time for me to say the last line in this whole twisted play. "You all got what you deserved. Goodbye," I said and blocked their numbers, ending everything. After that, I found a job and started living alone in an apartment near my parents' house. My father-in-law expanded his veterinary clinic and turned part of it into a cozy home. When I visited him one day, I saw how happy he was with his new life. He had adopted a little corgi and lived peacefully. "Maybe I'm happier with animals as my family," he said with a smile, as his corgi wagged its tail beside him. Watching how everything had fallen apart for my ex-husband, Brielle, and my mother-in-law, I made a promise to myself. I would always treat others with kindness, no matter what.